Well, welcome to the fun and mentals of real estate. I'm your host here, Angela Dillmon with Keller Williams Realty Chesterfield. We are here to help you build wealth.
Live your dream lifestyle.
And leave legacies that matter.
And this is my wealth building partner, Glen Calvin, over at Gilmartin. And our expert buyer's agent, Josh Gulledge, is joining us again today in our buyer series. So, question of the day, who's got it?
I got it. How much money do I need up front to hire a buyer's agent?
Oh, wow. Okay, so we are going to talk about buyer agency today.
Yes.
We have been going through the buyer presentation, basically like the buyer's consultation that Josh does. So, Josh, kind of recap us where we're at in it and what we've talked about so far.
Yeah, so again, we've been going through like, hey, Josh just now found out about a client, whether a phone call, whatever, and we talked about, the first step of getting them to a good lender. And
right.
Glenn really talked about the loan scenarios and what does it cost me to be able to purchase the home. Then we went in a little bit about, us as a team and what we do and our experience level. Mm-hmm. And now we've been going through multiple weeks of how you can be represented, the different ways. And now we're finally about ready to talk about how we prefer to represent people, which is buyer's agency.
That's probably where most of it happens, right?
Well, I'm away, at least around here in St. Louis, a lot of buyer agencies. So, one of the big things you just touched on is getting them to a lender first and making sure that the financials are in order. When you are unrepresented, or even if you use the listing agent, one of the things that we've talked about with that is that you are competing most of the time in multiple offer situations with other buyers who already have a very strong plan and scenario set up to make them look like very, very strong buyers to that listing agent, to that seller, so that seller picks them. Because most sellers, by the way, believe it or not, when you're in multiple offer situations, most of the time they're looking for the buyer not only that has the great price, but that's going to get all the way to closing with the least amount of hassles.
The easy button.
Right? Yeah. They don't want the appraisal to be low. They don't want a bunch of inspection stuff to come up and they have to pay a bunch of money or be hassled with the contractor. So
find out the buyer wasn't qualified.
That's right.
So one of the examples I had, this was pretty recent, was, I find out that they had been looking for a long time. So now they were no longer represented. I said, well, what's been the problem? Because they had great credit score. They were cash buyers. I mean, there was really no reason. They were like, well, we kept losing. Mm-hmm. And it was like, okay, well, were you putting low numbers? No, we were putting really high numbers. And I was like, okay, so I knew that it probably wasn't them. It was probably the representation, like that was setting them up for failure. Because if they think that they were putting very competitive offers and with their, cash position, their credit score, like, there's no reason that they should have been losing as much as they were losing. And sure enough, it was primarily driven on representation. And, after we got them to fully sign on, they, like, hey, they found 5 or 6 areas that they didn't realize like they looked like first-time home buyers. And they didn't even know it, the way that they were presenting their offers.
The way they're presenting, and that's what can happen when you're unrepresented or don't have great representation, is that even though you are financially sound and are a great buyer, you're not being presented as such. So buyer's agency is very important. Let's just talk about what it is for a minute, right? So when we talked about transaction agency last week, we discovered that they do not have the duty to work in your best interest. It is not a legal obligation of theirs.
They don't work for either person, right?
They don't represent anybody, right? It's they're a paper pusher and the door opener, right? So the buyer agency brings in that higher level of duty. Yep. We call it a fiduciary duty, but we have the legal obligation to work in the buyer's best interest, or if we have a listing, in the seller's best interest, with all good faith, loyalty, and fidelity. Confidentiality being a very big one, and not giving the store away or your motivation away unless you say to do that and it's appropriate for the time. So this buyer agency is a form, it's a contract, right? And so you sign it, and then these duties then now are legally, you're obligated as an agent to you. Now, one of the benefits of the buyer agency really is that, finding a house right now is super hard, and we did go over that in your buyer's representation. It can be hard to find a home right now, right? So, we've been in low inventory, right? Yes. Like you've got buyers that have you been pre-approved or even underwritten
It's so
completely,
frustrating,
and
right?
they can't find it, right? And so part of what we do is help you in that scenario. It takes hunting every single day.
And you can't do that until you have this document signed.
No,
And there's a reason why.
Yeah.
We talked about this earlier. It's not a handshake. It's not a trust. It's
no,
actually
it's a legal
by
binding
law.
contract. Yeah.
Right.
So one of the common misconceptions of the buyer's agency is no matter what agent they sign with, as long as you sign a buyer's agency, they're getting the same higher level of service.
And you don't.
And that's not true. So the buyer's agency is a 6-page document. Again, it has a beginning date and an ending date and says, hey, I'm representing you. And it could be for one house or many houses for this period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when it goes fiduciary duties and obligations and trust. So again, my job, I don't care if they tell me how much they'll pay for a house. My job is always to try to save them and get them as much money off the house as possible.
Right.
One of the recent scenarios we had was my clients were they were ready to sign the paperwork at the number we had in hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, hey, I still think we can go get more money if you want to give it a shot. I truly think that there's more money to be left.
So get less money for the house, right?
I think
less
we had
money.
one more counter in them. I could feel it. Again, it's always their decision. I let them say, and they said, well, if you really think that you can go get more money, and we saved an extra 10 grand. So
extra 10 grand,
that was
right? Always working
just
in
an
the best
extra
interest.
10 grand, and that's one of numerous scenarios that you can have. But with this NAR lawsuit, so when we're talking about it, and I explained it to buyers, National Association of Realtors settled their lawsuit. Again, I think there's good things and bad things that came about it, but it allows agents to charge however they really see fit. So some agents, their model is they charge you per door. Like, hey, it's X amount per door. And to be frank, I don't like that because I feel like they could show just, they don't care.
The more homes you show, the more money they make. That's not your best interest.
Exactly.
Right, that's not your best interest at all.
Keep
No.
you on as a client.
No, that's probably not the best business model for you as a buyer.
Some are more like lawyers. They're retainer based. So like money due up front.
Right.
And then money due at the end or pay at the end.
Right.
I think that we have set it up the best for buyers because we run buyers at such a elite high level. And it is, hey, I don't get paid unless you find and close on a home.
Close on a home. That's the only time we
So
get
when I
paid.
sign this contract, I'm not giving you any money to answer that question.
For us. Now, it's possible with other agencies you do sign money, but for us, you don't.
We do not charge money up front.
But
We charge money like, hey, again, when we talk about hidden fees, which we talked about on the loan scenario, it is, hey, when every house you buy, it is, here's the payment, here's what it's worth, here's what you got it for. Like, should be a good deal.
What you need at closing.
And here's what you need at closing. And my fees are lumped in that because, again, we're not going to get too in the weeds with it, but there's scenarios where the sellers are paying all the commission. There's sometimes the buyers are chipping in some of the commission.
Which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But
it's all settled the day of closing.
Yeah. All settled the day of closing. So back to a little bit of agency here. When you commit to an agent and an agent commits to you, now this agent, especially on our team, we're committing to a daily search. Now, not every agent's going to do that, but our search team is going to be looking every single day, which you don't have time to do, by the way, and you're missing a lot of stuff being unrepresented, right? You're only seeing what's on the net. We have all the off-market properties we talked about.
I was hoping you'd bring that up. Yeah, that's another thing that Josh and Angie are excellent at, and that is their networking abilities, the people that they know, the things that you two bring that aren't online or aren't on the MLS is astounding to me.
Yeah.
Right. And so we have the private collection where we have access to 1,200 agents, off-market properties, all the things. So this is a commitment, and this is one of the reasons you want to engage a buyer's agent is commitment on the buyer's agent to go hunt and find a house.
On the contract?
Beginning and end.
Right.
There's a beginning date and there's an end date.
Then you would renew it.
Right.
So it's not like if I sign this contract, I'm obligated for the rest of my life.
Right. So this buyer's agency contract is going to spell out what you're looking for. Hey, I'm looking in St. Charles and St. Louis County, and I'm looking between $300,000 and $400,000, and I want a 3-bedroom, whatever. Right. So it'll spell out a little bit of what you're looking for. And then it'll create this duty of loyalty and fidelity, confidentiality, good faith, right? It's going to spell all that out.
All that means is Josh is working for you.
He's working for you and your interest. That's right.
He's not for his broker. He's working for you.
So his duty is to go get as much information out of that listing agent as possible. So we love to let people talk. And so, we're very good at letting people talk and learning and gaining a lot of insight just by being friendly and letting them talk. All right. So, So this buyer agency contract is going to spell all those things out, okay? And it's going to create this legal duty, right? And so that's important. Now, the NAR settlement requires this form to be signed before you go see any property. Unless you're at an open house, you have to have this signed, okay? And so that's what the law is right now. So once that is signed, let's just talk about a little bit about how you do get paid. The reason the agency came into being in Missouri is because people were confused about who represented. Now you have no question about who represents you and who's representing the seller. That's number one. Number two, on it will spell out how you get paid, how much and when. We already did the when at closing. So how much, right? So you agree, it's negotiable, right, Josh? You agree on a commission. So X% of the sale price. It could be a flat fee. We usually do a percentage, but it could be a flat fee too. And you agree on this. Now, what if the seller, most of the time the seller is willing to participate to help pay your agent? And it's right on the contracts now. You just put it right on there of how much. Now, what if we agree on a certain percentage, Josh, and the seller's not quite willing to cover all of it? What happens?
So to use the drastic side is, if it's an investor deal, a lot of times, again, they're selling it so cheap. They're just saying, hey, they don't want to pay all these people, but the buyer still wants the representation and wants me to go find the deal for them.
Right.
And so I say, hey, here's the deal. And then they pay that. So again, it could be a small portion. It could be a dollar. It could be way more than that.
Yeah.
So it could
be like 0.3%, 0.25. It could be a 0.5%. Usually that's kind of the norm for us, I would say, is kind of more like either 0.5% or less, really,
again,
for most of these that if a seller's...
It's not something that surprises anybody. It's
No.
not something that shows up at the last minute.
No.
It's something that you know all about when you write that contract. And you've got a really
Eyes
good
wide open.
understanding about what those numbers are.
Eyes
so this
wide
was
open.
just a very recent example. Just as of like a week and a half ago, we had a scenario which we used it as part of our negotiating. So we were able to reduce the commission that the sellers were paying, and the buyers paid me directly on the statement. But again, our offer was still good, but in the eyes of the seller, it looked like they were paying less when really like they were getting the same. The math was still the same, but it's where it was coming from was a little different, and it actually helped us win a contract. So again,
and these buyers,
this lawsuit has really again opened up a lot of avenues, a lot of different things. I tell every buyer this: you really got to be careful, because I've also seen where it gives agents that don't have a very good moral compass, they have the opportunity to really almost negotiate for themselves and not on behalf of the buyers.
Right. So what we're seeing is a lot of commissions are being raised right now. And you're seeing a lot of higher commissions for buyer's agents on these contracts than were before, which I think is an unintended consequence of this NAR settlement. But you're seeing it here in St. Louis. You're seeing higher. Now, when they put that higher number on there, it may or may not be to your advantage when you're doing multiple offers. So having the option to pay a little bit of your buyer's agent at closing, not before, not obligated up front, right? But to pay it at closing, to bring it to closing, can help you win in multiple offer situations. And that's important as an option. You need to know.
This is a scenario that is very real, and I've seen multiple times as I've had agents that say, like, because again, they know that we operate our buyer level at service at a super high level. And so they oftentimes ask what we charge and stuff. And they will say, well, if you could go get more money, why don't you go get it? I was like, well, that clearly, like, that defeat. And they like to charge a super high amount. And if they can't get it, tear down. But that really shows that they're, in my opinion, working for themselves. I like to be super upfront with it and say, hey, like, you're going to get a super high level of service. We hunt for you all the time. We give you opportunities, and this is our fee. And it's not going to be, oh, if I can go get more money for myself, I will. No, this is my fee, and everything past that, I am working on getting you the best possible deal and price. I'm not just trying to make a big commission check for myself, because again, if I was trying to lock people into contracts, that's not what I don't get paid unless I find you the house. So
Right.
again, I really push
Right.
no hidden fees, really high level of service.
Right.
I think that speaks well to everybody. And again, they see what they're paying and why, and they can see the benefit in that, and they know that they're getting that trustworthy obligation, fiduciary duties that we take very seriously.
Right. And you know when you're negotiating and on this house exactly what your closing costs. Between Glenn and knowing what the commissions are right on the contracts now, you may need to bring an extra $1,500 to closing to help out in order to win the house.
And you know what?
It's really not that. It's not really not that expensive or big a deal.
They're so happy that they got this deal. It was put together.
That's
right. Such a small part of it. I have yet to see anybody that you guys work with that were unhappy with that. Most is just the opposite. They're thrilled that you got them such a great deal.
So buyer's agent's getting paid a little bit from the seller, maybe a little bit from you, a combination, maybe all from the seller. It's all what you negotiate these days.
No surprise.
And that's how it works.
Right.
Yeah. So you shouldn't need any money up front to go look. But there are business models out there. There are realtors out there that would charge you by the door. So watch what you're doing. Watch what you're signing on these buyer's agent. It is a legally binding contract. Well, thanks for joining us today so that we know exactly what a buyer agency is. It is the higher level of service. And if you don't know a good agent, now you do. All right. We'll see you next week.